Henry woke up early as usual. He liked to start the day with coffee and watching the news. For him, retirement was a symbol of well-deserved rest after decades of hard work. He could finally enjoy life. But that morning, everything changed. Among the bills and advertising brochures in his mailbox, he found a letter from the bank. Nothing unusual, he regularly received statements about his finances. But this time, something was wrong. Henry slowly tore open the envelope and began to read. His eyes skimmed the lines and his heart beat faster and faster. Dear Mr. Carlisle, we regret to inform you that your account with Future Financial Solutions is now empty, and the company has ceased to exist, and all assets have been declared lost. He read it again and again. The words were simple, but the meaning hit him like a punch in the chest. He was empty. His entire retirement savings, every cent he had saved for decades, was gone. This must be a mistake, he muttered, throwing the letter on the table. He grabbed his phone and dialed the company's number. After several long rings, a recorded voice came through. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Henry felt his fingers tremble. He tried to access the company's website, but the page wouldn't load. Though his back was sweating, his heart was pounding in his chest, and only one thought was pulsing through his mind. How is this possible? He rushed to his office, opened a drawer, and pulled out all the papers related to his investments. The amount he had entrusted to the company was substantial, almost everything he had saved over the years. His friends said it was a good investment. That's what his financial advisor had said about it. The same one who had spent years convincing him that it was a reliable fund, that the money was working for him, that the interest was growing. And now there was nothing. Having pledged all his savings, Henry also took out a small home loan because he was sure he would get a steady return on his investment. But now he had not only zero in his account, but also real debts. His heart clenched painfully. Henry tried to breathe deeply, but panic was rolling in. He quickly dialed the number of his financial advisor, someone he trusted. There was no answer. He tried again. Silence. Something inside him clenched. This is a scam. Henry couldn't believe it, but the facts spoke for themselves. He was the victim of a scam. His peaceful future had turned into a nightmare. Henry slowly sat down at his desk, staring at the letter in front of him. What to do? How to live on? Is there a chance to get at least some of the money back? Questions raged in his head, but he had no answers. One thing he knew for sure was that it would not stay that way. Henry Carlisle was always a man who knew the value of work. He started his career as a young man, working in his father's car repair shop. The work was hard, his hands always smelled of grease, and his nails were almost never clean. But he didn't complain. He knew that every dollar was earned honestly. Later, he went to college to study finance. During the day, he worked at a local auto parts store, and in the evenings he sat down to study his textbooks. He dreamed of stability and wanted to give himself and his future family a better life. After graduation, he got a job as an accountant in a large company, and a few years later he was promoted. His salary grew, and he was able to save money. So he began to build his future by making the first contributions to a retirement account. Henry was not a gambler and did not chase risky investments. He always thought about the long term. He got married and bought a house in a quiet suburb. He raised his children, worked, and provided for his family. Every month he saved a portion of his earnings, knowing that retirement age would come sooner or later. And when the children grew up and moved on with their lives, Henry and his wife began to dream of traveling. They wanted to see the Grand Canyon, take a boat ride in the Caribbean. maybe even travel to Europe. But everything was going according to plan, until a man appeared in his life who changed everything. His name was Mark Bellamy. He was a stylish, confident man who seemed to know the answers to all questions. Henry met him through a colleague. Mark introduced himself as an experienced financial advisor who had helped dozens of clients make profitable investments. His words sounded convincing. "Henry, your money needs to work for you. You don't want to just keep it in the bank, earning a pittance of interest. Think about the future. Why not grow your capital?" Henry was not stupid. He listened carefully, analyzed, and checked the information. Mark assured him that this investment company had been in business for over 20 years, that their clients were making steady profits. This is not another scam," Mark said, laughing. "I invested my own money, and my family also trusted this fund." But Henry wanted to be cautious. But he was also trusted because a colleague he knew had already used Mark's services and was satisfied. Mark didn't put any pressure. He gave Henry time to think about it, but at the same time sent him reports, analytics, and client success stories from time to time. You can start with a small amount and then, when you see the results, increase your investment," he said. After a few months of deliberation, Henry decided to make the first contribution. He set aside some of his savings and entrusted them to financial solutions for the future. The first reports looked great. The invested funds brought a steady income, and the amount on the account grew. Henry felt confident. Over time, he transferred almost all of his retirement savings there. He believed he had made the right choice. He thought he had secured his future. But he was wrong. Henry sat in the kitchen clutching the same letter from the investment company. His heart was pounding in his chest and his hands were shaking. "Your accounts have been closed due to the liquidation of the fund." A few dry sentences crossed out all his dreams of a peaceful old age. "This is some kind of mistake," he thought. "This can't be right." He grabbed his phone and dialed the number in the letter. It was an answering machine. He tried again and again. Still the same cold, mechanical voice. "The number you are calling is no longer in service." His fingers squeezed the cell phone until his knuckles turned white. "Are you kidding me?" He whispered under his breath. The next step was email. Henry opened his laptop and went to the company's website, but the page wouldn't load. All his messages to the financial advisor remained unanswered. His heart sank. He felt a cold fear rush up his throat. The next day, Henry went to his bank branch. He had papers with his deposits, statements, anything that could prove that his money was there, that it couldn't have just disappeared. The bank manager, a young woman in a strict suit, took the documents and looked them over carefully. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carlisle," she said, her voice polite but cold. "But your funds have been transferred to a third party, an investment company. We have no control over their actions." "But they couldn't just disappear. This is a big organization. They had been working for years." The woman looked at him sympathetically, but without any real emotion. "Unfortunately, such cases do happen. If the company was fraudulent, you should contact the financial regulator or file a police report." Financial regulator. The police. He didn't want excuses, he wanted answers. "You don't even know what you're saying. This is my entire life savings." "I understand your concern, Mr. Carlisle," the manager said. But her tone didn't change. "But the bank is not responsible for the investment losses of its clients." Henry stared at her in silence. He wanted to scream, to break the desk in half, to make them do something. But he just slowly got up and left the branch. Then he went to a lawyer's office. He found a lawyer who specialized in financial matters and told him the whole story. Oh, you're not the first person to come to me with a case like this," the lawyer said, flipping through the documents. "It looks like it was a classic pyramid scheme. They collected money from new investors to pay interest to old clients, creating the illusion of profit. When the money flow dried up, they simply disappeared." "But this is illegal." "Of course it is. However, it will be difficult to prove anything. If the company has officially declared bankruptcy, even if the court finds them guilty, you are unlikely to receive compensation." Henry could feel his breathing getting harder. They stole everything from me," he said in a hoarse voice. "I understand your anger, Mr. Carlisle. I can file a lawsuit on your behalf, but I warn you it could take years, and the chance of getting your money back is slim." Henry leaned forward. "What do you want me to do?" The lawyer sighed and shrugged. "It's terrible, but maybe you should accept it and move on. Move on. How? With no retirement savings, no plans for the future, no certainty that he would even be able to pay his rent in a few months. He called Mark Bellamy, the same consultant who had convinced him to invest. The phone was off. Henry found his address and drove to his house. He knocked on the door, rang the bell, but no one answered. The neighbor, an elderly woman in a bathrobe, looked out from behind the fence. "Are you looking for him?" she asked. Yes, Mark Bellamy." The woman hummed. "He's disappeared. The police came here before. They said he had scammed dozens of people for money. Are you one of them?" Henry didn't answer. He just stood there looking at the empty house in front of him. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Yesterday he had hoped that he would find a way out. Today, he realized that he was trapped with no easy way out. He had been honest all his life. He worked hard, took no risks, and thought through every step. And yet he was deceived. Henry was sitting in his car in front of the office building where Financial Solutions of the Future was located just a few days ago. Yesterday he had received an official letter proving his worst fears. His money was gone. The deposits had dissolved. The account was zeroed out. He got out of the car, looked up, and saw that instead of the familiar shiny company logo, there was a sign on the door. Closed. The doors were locked and the windows were curtained. Inside, there was not a single hint that people were working here. Yesterday, everything was different. Henry rushed into the bank to find out what had happened. The manager, unfolded the papers with an alienated expression and began to explain in legal terms that the money he had invested belonged to the company, not to the depositors. "But it was my savings!" Henry interrupted him. "I understand, Mr. Carlisle, but these investments were not subject to government guarantees. Did you know it was a scam?" The manager pursed his lips and avoided looking at him. "We don't supervise private investment funds." Henry felt his heart pounding. "You mean there's no money?" The manager nodded. "All the company's assets are frozen for investigation." Investigation. The word hurt Henry. It meant that there were many people like him. Henry pulled out his phone and started looking for information. The news screamed with headlines. Big financial scam investment fund raised millions and disappeared. Ponzi scheme, another trap for pensioners. Each article described a familiar scenario, promises of high profits, stability, attracting new investors to pay old investors. A classic pyramid scheme. Henry began to find stories of similar victims. In a Sarah Mitchell, 70 years old dog, "I invested all my money, and now I don't even know how to pay the bills." George Anderson, 65 years old, "They promised me a steady income, and now I can't even afford my medicine." They all had something in common. They believed they had secured their future. The worst was yet to come. It turned out that Mark Bellamy, the financial advisor, had already fled the country a few weeks ago. His trail leads to South America, said the investigator Henry contacted. We're trying to establish his whereabouts. So he just took off. That's right. Henry clutched the phone in his hand. His money was stolen, and his dreams had been shattered, and the crook who had promised him a stable old age was probably enjoying a luxurious life on a beach somewhere. Henry no longer felt fear, only burning anger. Jim was sitting in a conference center hall that had been rented for a meeting of victims of the financial scam. In front of him were dozens of people just like him. Their eyes were filled with anger, frustration, and despair. Unknowingly, each of them had believed that their money was in a safe place, that their old age would be peaceful. And now they were all forced to deal with the consequences of someone else's greed. A middle-aged woman with a short haircut named Karen was the first to speak. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke. We're all victims of fraud. They promised us stability, they promised us high interest, and now there's no money and no one to blame. Outraged voices began to come from different parts of the room. This was our only chance for a peaceful old age. A man in a gray sweater shouted. I sold my house to make this contribution, added an elderly woman named Mary. Jim listened and felt his anger boiling up inside him. All of these people had been deceived, and apparently the culprit was far away. The more he listened to the stories of the others, the more devastated he felt. When a man in an expensive suit came to the podium and introduced himself as a lawyer, everyone fell silent. He began to explain the situation in legalese. So what do you suggest we do? Just sit and wait. Jim asked loudly, standing up from his seat. We can try to file a class action lawsuit, the lawyer replied. How long will that take? Asked Karen. Years, the man shrugged. This answer caused a real flurry of emotions. People started shouting, interrupting each other, blaming the authorities, the system, even themselves for being too trusting. Jim felt hopeless. What to do now? Wait for years. A fight in the courts. What would happen next? Would he live at the mercy of his friends, or would he be left homeless? In the midst of the chaos, he heard a soft voice. It was Mary, who spoke more calmly than anyone else. Her words touched Jim. She was right. But what to do next? His eyes fell on the letter he held in his hands. It contained only dry wording. Your account has been closed. No funds are available. But for Jim, it was not just a piece of paper. It was a point of no return. A person can accept many things, but not the feeling of being used. That's exactly how John felt when he began to unravel the tangle of lies that had left him penniless. After meeting with other defrauded investors, John couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of the man who had promised him a carefree old age. And now that man had disappeared, taking his hopes with him. But there was one detail that kept bothering John. Some of the victims were behaving differently, not like the others. For example, Mr. Blake, one of the first investors, seemed to be hurt, but his eyes didn't betray despair. And one more thing, Blake had a new, expensive car, while all the other investors were saving on literally everything. John started digging. The more John asked, the more disturbing details came to light. His neighbor, Mrs. of a Harper, who had also invested, admitted to him that she had received several payouts before the scheme collapsed. But she didn't say it out loud because she was afraid of the wrath of other investors. Are you saying you knew about this? John asked, feeling his heart clench. I didn't do anything wrong. The woman defended herself. I was just lucky to get out early. Lucky? His voice was bitterly mocking. You mean you got money at the expense of people like me? Her silence was the answer. Now everything was falling into place. Some of the depositors, like Blake, knew more than they were saying. And they may even help lure new investors by getting their payouts out of other people's pockets. John remembered that one of his friends, Linda, worked as an accountant for a financial advisory company. He arranged a meeting with her, hoping to get more information about the scammer. His real name is not Robert Lawson, as he introduced himself, Linda said, laying out the papers in front of him. He's been involved in similar schemes before. I don't know he got away with it. But he changed his papers, changed his name, and then he was back at it again. John felt anger boiling up inside him. Did any of our friends know about this? Linda sighed. Maybe they did. I can't say for sure, but there have been some strange movements in Blake's accounts. He was receiving large sums of money before the scheme collapsed. John clenched his fists. Now it all became cleared. Some of the people knew they were being scammed, but kept quiet because they were getting a piece of the pie. John sat alone in his apartment. He was thinking about how many years he had worked, how much he had saved, how much he had sacrificed for a secure future. And all of this had gone down the drain, not only because of the scammer, but also because of the people he considered friends. So it's all just a game, he muttered to himself. Is money what really drives people? He thought of Blake, who might even have laughed at people like him. Of Mrs. Harper, who was quietly glad to have gotten out. About those who kept silent, knowing that others were being condemned to poverty. It was not just a financial loss. It was a loss of trust. John had two choices, either accept it and leave it behind or fight. He didn't know if he would be able to get any money back. But he knew one thing, he would not keep silent any longer. The next morning, he picked up phone and dialed the number of a journalist who was investigating financial fraud. I have a story for you, he said, his voice not shaking. It was not revenge. It was justice. Sitting in his small apartment, which just a few weeks ago seemed like a comfortable place for a quiet old age, the hero felt devastated. He had once had a clear plan traveling, a carefree life, a quiet evening with a book in his hands. Now it all seemed illusory. His phone was silent. His friends, who had recently invited him to dinner, now avoided any conversation. They were either afraid that he would ask them for money or simply did not know what to say. But that was not the most painful thing. The worst part was the feeling that the world around him was indifferent to his grief. The police gave no guarantees that the perpetrators would be punished. Lawyers honestly admitted that there was almost no chance of getting the money back. The hero gathered the remnants of his courage and decided to call his old friend. You have to fight, he said. You can't just give away your hard-earned money. These words made him think. He opened his laptop, read all the news about the fraudulent scheme again, and looked at articles about similar scams. People had been suing for years, and some even managed to get compensation. But did he have the strength to do it? The hero went back to thinking about how it all happened. He recalled the first meeting with the man who convinced him to invest. A pleasant voice, convincing arguments, documents that seemed genuine. How could I have been so blind? He thought. His anger began to grow. He remembered every moment, every sign he had ignored. He wanted to get up, pick up the phone and shout, demand justice, blame everyone involved. But to whom could he shout? The fraudster had disappeared. The bank denied it. The authorities shrugged their shoulders. At that moment, the phone rang. It was one of the depositors he had met at a meeting of defrauded people. We have a chance. We are gathering a group for a lawsuit. We need to act quickly. The hero closed his eyes. It was a chance. But at the same time, it meant years of struggle, lawyer fees, and constant stress. "I'll think about it," he said. That night he hardly slept. There were two scenarios in his mind. The first was to forget about everything, try to start life from scratch, find a new job, try to build a future, even if it was not so carefree. The second is to fight, going all the way, writing complaints, going on TV collecting evidence, and every time he imagined himself in a long legal battle, he gave up. In the morning, he made himself a coffee, stood by the window, and realized that the decision had already been made. He was sitting on an old park bench, watching the sun slowly sink behind the horizon. In his pocket was an envelope with the final answer. It was not just an answer, but the key to his future. The last few months had turned his life into an endless whirlwind of events, loss of all his savings, betrayal, disappointment, sleepless nights looking for a way out. He was forced to deal not only with his finances, but also with his emotions. Now he had two choices: fight for justice or leave the past behind and start from scratch. He slowly opened the envelope. His lawyer advised him to try to sue, but that meant years of red tape, huge expenses, and no guarantee of a refund. On the other hand, there was a chance to start a new life, albeit in much more modest conditions. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Is it really worth it?" asked an unfamiliar woman on a nearby bench. She was also holding papers. Their eyes met. She, like him, was among those who had lost everything. They talked for almost an hour about how easily a person can lose everything and how difficult it is to find the strength to move on. I decided to move forward no matter what. One will give me my money back, but I won't let it destroy me," she said and smiled. These words stuck in his head. The next morning he stood in front of the bank's door. For the last time, he signed the documents, refusing to go through with the legal proceedings. The loss was huge, but life is more precious. He sold his remaining house, gathered his small savings, and bought a ticket. Where was he going? But he didn't know yet. The main thing was to move on. No.